6 months after the Ethelred breach, the case file for Project Chimera was gathering dust. Agent Thorne found himself staring at a corkboard filled with faces, timelines, and lines of red yarn that connected everyone to everything, and ultimately to nothing. It was a monument to a dead end. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the silence was broken. An email arrived, not to the OSI's official servers, but to a long-dormant encrypted address Thorne used for deep-cover informants. The message was brief, a string of text on a black screen. It read, "You're looking in the wrong place. The ghost wasn't outside the house. It was born there." The sender was identified only by a single name, Cassandra. Thorne's first instinct was skepticism. In his line of work, anonymous tips were usually hoaxes, disgruntled employees, or traps laid by foreign intelligence. But this felt different. The encryption used was 3 layers deep, a sophisticated custom-built protocol that screamed paranoia and expertise. His team of cyber analysts worked for 48 hours straight just to trace its origin, only to find it had been bounced through a dozen proxy servers across 3 continents. It was untraceable. Thorne replied with a single cautious question. "Prove it." 24 hours later, the response came. It was a single line of source code. Thorne immediately recognized it. It was a fragment of the diagnostic subroutine from the Chimera project, a piece of digital DNA so obscure, so specific, that it had never been mentioned in any unclassified report. It was impossible for anyone outside the original breach to possess it. Cassandra was real. A delicate, high-stakes correspondence began. Cassandra communicated in riddles and warnings, their paranoia bleeding through every encrypted message. They refused to speak on the phone, refused any form of direct contact. They spoke of a conspiracy that ran deeper than corporate espionage, hinting at a shadow network operating within Ethelred dynamics, protected by powerful figures in Washington. "You think this was about selling secrets to the highest bidder," one message read. "You're wrong. This was about control." This was a message. Each new piece of information was a breadcrumb, leading Thorne further into the labyrinth. Cassandra revealed the existence of a ghost terminal within Ethelred's network, a machine that officially didn't exist but had the highest level of security clearance, capable of accessing any system without leaving a trace. This was the murder weapon. The investigation was reborn, infused with a new, dangerous energy. But it all hinged on a faceless informant, a digital phantom who held all the cards. Thorne knew he couldn't proceed with an anonymous source. He needed a witness. He needed to bring Cassandra in from the cold. After weeks of careful negotiation, building a fragile trust, Cassandra finally agreed to a meeting. The conditions were extreme, a testament to their terror. They would only come in if the OSI initiated Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was not a procedure you could find in any official government handbook. It was a ghost page, a series of off-the-books directives for handling an asset of unparalleled importance and unparalleled risk. It was designed for one purpose: to make a person vanish from the face of the earth, to turn them into a living ghost under the protection of the state. Invoking it for Cassandra was a measure of how critical their information had become. The first step was erasure. Cassandra's entire life had to be dismantled digitally and physically. Credit cards, social security numbers, bank accounts, driver's licenses, all were systematically corrupted or flagged as deceased. A team of sweepers, specialists in counter-surveillance, spent a week mapping out every detail of Cassandra's life, identifying blind spots in the city's CCTV network, and planning an extraction route with zero exposure. The extraction itself was a masterpiece of silent precision. On a moonless night, 3 unmarked black sedans glided to a stop in a quiet suburban neighborhood. No doors slammed, no voices were raised. Shadows detached from the cars and melted into the deeper shadows of a nondescript 2-story house. Minutes later, they re-emerged with a third figure, hooded and flanked on all sides. The convoy pulled away as silently as it had arrived. Inside the lead car, Cassandra was revealed to be Elias Vance, a mid-level systems analyst from Ethelred Dynamics. He was not a hardened spy or a grizzled operative. He was a man drowning in fear, his face pale, his hands trembling. He was an ordinary man who had stumbled into an extraordinary nightmare. The destination was a safe house in rural Virginia, a property seized by the government years ago and kept off all public records. From the outside, it was a perfectly average, slightly run-down farmhouse. Inside, it was a fortress. The windows were ballistic glass, the walls were lined with a fine mesh that blocked all incoming and outgoing electronic signals. The rooms were sparse, functional, and constantly monitored. It was a cage designed for absolute safety and absolute isolation. For the first 72 hours, Vance barely spoke. He paced the length of his room, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. Agent Thorne gave him space, understanding that the psychological transition from a normal life to being a state secret was a brutal one. The agents guarding the house were specters, changing shifts without a word, their presence a constant, silent reminder of the danger that lurked outside the insulated walls. The only sounds were the hum of the air filtration system and the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall, each tick marking another second of borrowed time. The safe house was a bubble, a pocket dimension removed from the real world. Inside this bubble, Thorne hoped the truth could finally be coaxed out. After 3 days of decompression, Thorne decided it was time. The preliminary deposition was scheduled. The witness was secure. The stage was set to finally uncover what happened inside Ethelred Dynamics. The silence was about to be filled. The deposition took place in the most secure room of the safe house, a windowless space in the basement, soundproofed and stripped of all non-essential items. The air was cold and still. On a simple steel table sat a digital audio recorder, a glass of water, and a thick, black-bound file stamped Top Secret. Agent Thorne sat on one side, his expression unreadable. On the other sat Elias Vance, no longer the anonymous Cassandra, but a terrified man about to betray people who operated in the highest echelons of power. Thorne began the recording, stating the date, time, and location for the record. His voice was calm, measured, designed to soothe. He started with baseline questions, asking Vance to detail his role at Ethelred Dynamics, his security clearance, and his daily responsibilities. Vance's voice was a low whisper, but it grew stronger as he spoke, the act of confession seemingly giving him a sliver of courage. He explained how, during a routine diagnostic, he discovered an anomaly in the server logs, a hidden command line that acted as a universal key, bypassing every security protocol. It was a backdoor of impossible elegance and sophistication. It wasn't a hack, Vance stated, his eyes wide. It was architecture. It was built into the system from the beginning. Thorne leaned forward, his focus absolute. Whose architecture? Vance hesitated, swallowing hard. He had followed the digital breadcrumbs, a dangerous act of unauthorized curiosity. The trail led him not to an external IP address, but to an internal ghost terminal, a machine that didn't officially exist. The credentials used to authorize the terminal, Vance said, his voice barely audible, belonged to Director Callaway. The name hung in the air like poison. Robert Callaway was Ethelred's executive director of special projects, a man with deep ties to the Pentagon and the intelligence community. He was, for all intents and purposes, untouchable. This was the bombshell. The breach was not just an inside job, it was orchestrated from the very top. Vance continued, explaining that the stolen data was more than just the schematics for Project Chimera. Hidden within that data packet was a second, far more encrypted file. It was codenamed Protocol 0. Vance had no idea what it contained, but he knew its security classification was higher than anything he had ever seen. He believed the theft of Chimera was just a cover, a distraction for the real target. "They aren't just selling weapons technology, Agent Thorne," Vance whispered, leaning over the table. "They are building something else. Protocol 0, it's not a weapon, it's a..." At that exact moment, a single, almost imperceptible event occurred. The lights in the room flickered for less than a second. The digital recorder on the table emitted a faint electronic chirp, and its red recording light went dark. Thorne looked from the recorder to Vance. The man's face had gone ashen, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. His newfound courage instantly evaporated and replaced with a primal, absolute terror. He had heard something Thorne had not. The safe house, their impenetrable fortress, had been compromised. The deposition was over. The silence that followed was heavier and more final than any that had come before. The investigation had not just hit a dead end. It had fallen off a cliff. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Welcome back to the Obsidian Archive. In the previous chapters, we established the framework of Operation Nightshade and introduced its pivotal yet fragile asset, a mid-level cryptographer, codenamed Echo. Echo, whose real name was Arthur Finch, had approached the agency with information that threatened to unravel a vast network of corporate espionage tied to foreign intelligence. He was a man running from his own shadow, and the agency saw him as their silver bullet. But as the investigation deepened, the bullet began to lose its trajectory. The first indication that control was slipping came not from a visual sighting or a broken promise, but from the low, magnetic hiss of audio tape. This is where our investigation resumes. The surveillance logs, specifically the wiretaps placed on Finch's designated secure line. At first, the recordings were mundane, procedural, check-in calls with his handler, codenamed Silas. Finch would confirm his status using prearranged codes. "The weather is clear," meant he was safe. "Expecting rain" signified heightened anxiety. For 2 weeks, the weather was clear. But then the barometer began to fall. The transcripts, heavily redacted even in these declassified files, show a marked shift in Finch's demeanor. His speech patterns became clipped, erratic. He started speaking in oblique metaphors, referencing obscure chess moves and lines from forgotten poetry, a language Silas struggled to decipher. On tape log 7B4, you can hear it. The audio is poor, degraded over the decades, but the fear is timeless. Finch whispers, "The rooks are off the board. They've left the rooks behind." Silas, clearly confused, tries to bring him back to protocol. "Echo, report status. Is the perimeter secure?" A long pause follows, filled only with the sound of static and what sounds like shallow breathing. Then, Finch says, "There is no perimeter, just a reflection in a black window." The analysts at the time flagged this as paranoia, a symptom of the immense pressure he was under. They noted his psyche was fracturing, but a few dissenting voices in the margins of the reports suggested something else. That Finch wasn't breaking down. He was communicating. He was trying to warn Silas that their secured reality was an illusion, that they were being watched by an entity they couldn't see. The most chilling recording is the last one from this period. Finch doesn't use any codes. He simply asks Silas, "Do you hear that?" Silas responds, "I hear nothing, Echo. The line is clean." Finch's reply, barely audible, was, "Exactly." The line goes dead. For 72 hours, there was silence. The whispers on the tapped line had ceased, replaced by an unnerving quiet that was far more terrifying than any coded warning. The agency believed their asset had gone dark out of fear. The truth was far more sinister. The silence wasn't an absence of communication. It was a message in itself. The game had changed, and Arthur Finch, the man they called Echo, was no longer a player. He was the board itself. The silence from Arthur Finch sent ripples of panic through the highest levels of Operation Nightshade. In the absence of electronic communication, the focus shifted to a more analog source of intelligence, the personal logbook of his handler, Silas. This wasn't standard procedure. A handler's private logs are considered sacrosanct, a confidential space for unfiltered thoughts and professional frustrations. Forcing him to turn it over was a sign of extreme desperation. The logbook itself, bound in worn black leather, is a testament to the paranoia of the era. Its pages are filled with Silas's tight, precise script, documenting every meeting, every observation, every flicker of doubt. Early entries describe Finch as sharp, cautious, but committed. He details their first clandestine meetings in rain-slicked alleyways and the back rooms of dusty, forgotten libraries, classic Cold War tradecraft. But as the weeks wore on, the tone of the entries began to sour. Silas wrote of Finch's growing obsession with being followed. AF claims a man in a gray coat has been present at our last 3 exchanges. I have swept the locations. Counter-surveillance sees nothing. Is he breaking? Or is their tradecraft simply better than ours? This single entry highlights the core dilemma of the operation. Was their witness succumbing to pressure? Or was he seeing a threat that the agency, with all its resources, was blind to? The logbook becomes a chronicle of a man watching his asset and his case disintegrate. Silas details dead drops that felt compromised, signals that were missed, and a constant creeping feeling of being outmaneuvered. One particularly harrowing entry, dated just 2 days before the final tapped phone call, reads, "Met with AF at the Arboretum. He didn't speak. He handed me a child's crayon drawing of a house with no doors and a single black tree in the yard. He looked right through me. I felt like I was speaking to a ghost." The drawing was logged as evidence, item 407B, but has since vanished from the archives. Was it a cry for help? A map? A warning? Silas, a seasoned professional, was clearly shaken. His final entry on Finch is brief, almost a surrender. He called, said nothing of substance. The silence on the line was deafening. I have lost him. We have lost him. Reading the logbook is like reading a slow-motion car crash. Silas documents every red flag, every warning sign, yet feels powerless to stop it. He was a good handler, meticulous and professional, but he was playing a game whose rules were being rewritten by an invisible opponent. The logbook shows that the agency didn't just lose their witness. They were actively being dismantled, piece by piece, by a force that understood their methods better than they did. The book closes not with a solution, but with a question that hangs over the entire investigation. Who was handling whom? Every operation of this nature relies on one fundamental principle: the integrity of the perimeter. For Arthur Finch, that perimeter was Safe House Delta, a nondescript apartment on the third floor of a pre-war building, chosen for its anonymity and multiple egress points. The agency considered it impenetrable. It was staffed with a rotating two-man surveillance team in a van across the street, fitted with motion sensors, and its windows were coated with a film to prevent laser microphones. On paper, Finch was in a fortress, but fortresses, as history teaches us, are only as strong as their weakest point. The breakdown of Safe House Delta wasn't a dramatic, explosive breach. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, a series of small, almost insignificant anomalies that were dismissed at the time, but in hindsight formed a terrifying mosaic. It began with what the logs call intermittent signal degradation. For periods of 30 to 45 seconds, the audio and video feeds from the surveillance van would fizzle into static. The tech team blamed it on solar flares or interference from a nearby radio tower. It happened 3 times in the week, leading up to Finch's disappearance. Then came the physical anomalies. A maintenance report filed by the building's superintendent, a man who was unknowingly on the agency's payroll, mentioned a persistent issue with the fuse box in the basement. He noted that the breaker for the 3rd floor, Finch's floor, had been tripped twice. He found no evidence of a power surge or faulty wiring. He simply reset it and moved on. Inside the apartment, things were even stranger. Finch, in one of his last coherent calls to Silas, complained that objects were being moved. A book he was reading was left on the table when it should have been on the nightstand. The sugar bowl in the kitchen was empty, despite being filled that morning. The surveillance team, reviewing their footage, saw nothing. No unauthorized entry, no sign of a break-in. They logged Finch's complaints as symptoms of psychological distress. They were treating the patient, not the disease. The most significant crack appeared 48 hours before the end. The surveillance team, a fresh crew named Miller and Shaw, noted a new vehicle parked down the street, a dark green sedan, unremarkable in every way except one. It had no license plates. They reported it, as per protocol. The vehicle was flagged, but before a patrol unit could be dispatched to investigate, it was gone. It was there for a total of 7 minutes. 7 minutes. What could happen in 7 minutes? In the world of espionage, it's an eternity. These events, the static, the tripped breaker, the misplaced book, the phantom car, were all individual data points. Isolated, they meant nothing. But when viewed together, they paint a clear picture of a sophisticated, methodical infiltration. The perimeter wasn't breached, it was dissolved. The enemy wasn't at the gates. They were already inside, walking the halls, moving the furniture, and turning the fortress into a tomb, all while the guards were staring intently at a blank screen. After 72 hours of complete silence, The agency protocols for a missing asset were activated. A two-man team was sent to physically check on Safehouse Delta. They found the door unlocked. This, in itself, was a catastrophic failure of procedure. What they found inside was not a crime scene, but a stage, meticulously set to be as confusing as possible. There were no signs of a struggle. A half-finished game of solitaire was laid out on the coffee table. A cup of tea, now cold, sat beside it. In the kitchen, a pan was soaking in the sink. The bed was made. It was a scene of mundane domestic life, abruptly paused. Arthur Finch was gone. The team's report stated, "The apartment is sterile. It appears the subject simply walked out." But the details didn't add up. Finch's wallet and keys were on the dresser. His jacket was on the back of a chair. The only things missing were the clothes he was wearing and a worn copy of Moby Dick from the nightstand. The final confirmed sighting of Arthur Finch was not from the agency, but from an elderly woman who lived across the hall. In her statement, heavily redacted in the official file, she claims to have seen Finch leaving his apartment around 11 p.m. on the night he vanished. She said he wasn't alone. He was with two men, both tall, both wearing dark suits. She said what was odd was how calm it all seemed. They didn't push him, her statement reads. They walked on either side of him. Arthur looked straight ahead like a man in a trance. He didn't even look at me when I said good evening. The surveillance team in the van across the street saw nothing. Their logs for that time show a 90-second period of complete signal loss, audio and video. When the feed returned, the street was empty. They had missed him by seconds. This is the moment Arthur Finch transitions from an asset to a ghost. He becomes the dead-end witness. The investigation into the corporate espionage ring he was exposing collapsed without its star witness. The files were quietly shelved, stamped unresolved, and buried in the archives. What happened to Arthur Finch? Theories abound. Was he extracted by the very people he was trying to expose? Was he taken into a deeper, more clandestine protection program by a shadowy faction within the agency itself? Or did he, as the calm look on his face might suggest, simply go willingly to his fate, having played his final move in a game he knew he could not win? The only clue left behind was found weeks later, when the copy of Moby Dick was anonymously mailed back to the agency's dead letter office. A single passage was underlined. "To the last I grapple with thee. From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee." It was a final defiant whisper from the void. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Welcome back to the Obsidian Archive. We return to the labyrinthine case of the phantom informant, known only as Cassian. Our last entry left investigators at a precipice, believing they had finally secured their star witness, the one individual whose testimony could dismantle a decades-old shadow network. He was placed in a nondescript safe house, location designated Site Gamma, a place that existed only in sealed envelopes and whispered conversations. For 72 hours, there was silence. A good silence, the kind that suggested security and control. But on the fourth day, that silence curdled into something else entirely. The check-in call went unanswered. Then another. By noon, the protocol was broken, and a two-man team was dispatched. They found the door unlocked. The air inside was cold, stale, carrying the scent of bleach and something else. Ozone. like the after-smell of a lightning strike. The room was not a crime scene in the traditional sense. There was no struggle, no blood, no sign of forced entry. It was something far more unsettling. It was a void. The single bed was made with military precision. A half-empty glass of water sat on the nightstand, showing no fingerprints. The closet contained a single change of clothes, folded neatly on a shelf. Everything the agency had provided Cassian was there. Everything he had brought with him, however, was gone. His shoes, his coat, the worn leather-bound book he was seen clutching when they brought him in, all vanished. It was as if he had been meticulously erased from the space. The team noted the window was locked from the inside. The only door had been under their own surveillance. There were no hidden passages, no escape routes. It defied logic. In the official report, they called it a voluntary extraction. But the agents on the ground knew better. You could feel the ghost of a threat lingering in the plaster, in the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the window. The most disturbing detail was found under the bed. A single tarnished silver locket, empty. It hadn't been logged in his personal effects. It was a piece of him left behind, a deliberate breadcrumb or a forgotten token. But what did it mean? This empty room was the true beginning of the investigation's end. It was the moment Cassian transitioned from a man into a ghost, and the case transformed from a pursuit of justice into a hunt for a memory. The official narrative was that the witness had fled, gotten cold feet. But the bleached floorboards and the ozone in the air told a different story. A story of an impossible breach, a silent professional operation that left no trace but an overwhelming sense of dread. The investigation into the Shadow Network had hit a wall, but a new, more terrifying investigation had just begun. The search for the dead-end witness. The disappearance of Cassian from Site Gamma effectively froze the larger investigation. Without its central pillar, the entire case structure collapsed. For 5 years, the files gathered dust in a sub-basement archive, a monument to failure. The official story held firm. Witness fled, case closed due to insufficient evidence. It was a neat, tidy lie that satisfied the bureaucracy. But truth, like mold, grows in the dark. In 2011, during a mandated archival digitization project, a junior analyst stumbled upon a misfiled manila folder. It had no official case number, only a hand-scrawled designation, 73B. Agency protocol dictated that such anomalies be flagged for destruction. But the analyst, a young woman named Evelyn Reed, was curious. The file felt heavy, important. Inside, she didn't find typed reports or official forms. Instead, it was a collection of ephemera, the kind of things an investigator keeps off the books. There was a single grainy photograph of a man who matched Cassian's description. But he was younger, standing on a pier with a woman whose face was obscured by shadow. There was a transit map of the city, marked with a series of cryptic symbols in red ink, forming a pattern that was not geographic, but almost geometric. There was a cocktail napkin from a defunct jazz club, the Blue Dahlia, with a sequence of numbers written on it. And tucked into a small envelope was a pressed flower, an edelweiss, a species not native to the continent. This was not a case file. It was a treasure map or a warning. Reed knew she was holding something dangerous. File 73B wasn't part of the official Cassian investigation. It was someone's private investigation into him compiled before he ever became a witness. This suggested that someone inside the agency had been tracking him long before he came in from the cold. Who was this shadow investigator? Were they trying to help him, or were they the ones who orchestrated his disappearance? The numbers on the napkin, when cross-referenced with library call numbers, pointed to an obscure book on celestial navigation. The symbols on the map corresponded to dates of unsolved disappearances going back 30 years. The woman in the photograph remained a mystery. File 73B was a Pandora's box. Evelyn Reed was faced with a choice: report the file and see it incinerated, burying the truth forever, or begin her own clandestine inquiry. She chose the latter. Working after hours, using back-channel resources, she started pulling the threads. She learned the Blue Dahlia was a known haunt for intelligence agents in the 70s. She discovered the original investigator assigned to Cassian, a man named Arthur Finch, had died in a single-car accident just a week after Cassian vanished. An accident with no skid marks. File 73B was his. Finch hadn't believed the official story. He had continued to dig, and it had cost him his life. The investigation was no longer about a missing witness who represented a dead end. It was about an agency that created them. Armed with the fragmented clues from Arthur Finch's ghost file, Evelyn Reed began to move beyond the archives. She knew the paper trail was cold. The truth, if it existed, now resided only in the memories of those who were there. Her first step was to seek out the old guard, the retired agents who had worked during Finch's era. These were men in their late 70s and 80s, living quiet lives in sleepy suburbs, their pasts supposedly buried under decades of civilian routine. Reed approached them cautiously, using a cover story about a historical review of agency interrogation techniques. But the moment she mentioned the Blue Dahlia Club, or the name Cassian, or even Arthur Finch, a uniform change occurred. A veil would drop behind their eyes. The friendly, forgetful old man would vanish, replaced by the ghost of a trained intelligence officer. The answers became clipped, evasive. Never heard of him. That was a long time ago, I don't recall. You shouldn't be asking about that. One former station chief, a man named Sterling, gave her the most chilling response. He simply stirred his iced tea, looked out the window, and said, "Some trees are too rotten to be shaken. You just let them fall on their own." It was not a piece of advice. It was a threat. The silence was not passive. It was an active, coordinated defense. It was a wall built of feigned ignorance and veiled warnings. Reed realized she wasn't just fighting a cover-up. She was fighting the very culture of the institution she worked for. She tried to access Finch's personnel file, only to find it had been reclassified to a level far above her clearance. His death certificate was a simple statement of accidental death, but the full coroner's report was sealed by a federal judge whose name appeared nowhere else in public records. Every path she took led to a locked door, and behind each door was another, higher-ranking official who held the key. This was the true dead end. It wasn't a lack of leads. It was a systemic, institutional refusal to allow the truth to be pursued. The witness was a dead end because the organization had made him one. They had built a labyrinth of bureaucracy and silence around his memory. Reed even tried to track down the two agents who first entered the empty safe house. One had died of a sudden heart attack a year after the incident. The other had taken early retirement and, according to his neighbors, moved overseas without a forwarding address. Every person who had touched the edges of this case had been neatly removed from the board. It became terrifyingly clear that the shadow network Cassian was meant to expose was not an external entity. It was an internal infection, a rot within the agency itself. And the circles of official silence were not just protecting a past failure. They were actively maintaining a present conspiracy. Evelyn Reed had one last, desperate card to play. Using a digital backdoor she had discovered during the archival project, she initiated a high-level priority request for the complete, unedited case file on the Cassian disappearance. She masked her credentials, routing the request through the dormant ID of a long-dead deputy director. It was an incredible risk. If discovered, it would mean the end of her career and potential federal charges. For 3 days, she heard nothing. Then one morning, a single encrypted file appeared on her terminal. Its title was simple, Gamma C Final. She opened it. It was hundreds of pages long, a river of black ink and sterile typewritten text. But as she scrolled, her heart sank. While she had accessed the highest level file, it was still not whole. Dozens of pages were almost entirely blacked out with the thick, unforgiving bars of redaction. Names, dates, locations, entire paragraphs, all consumed by official secrecy. Yet, the redactions themselves told a story. She could see the shape of the cover-up in the negative space. A recurring name was blacked out every time it appeared next to the phrase internal transfer or protocol override. The name of the judge who sealed the coroner's report was redacted, but the unredacted text mentioned his direct line to the Office of Special Counsel, a department that officially didn't exist at the time. The most revealing and frustrating section was the transcript of the last known communication from Site Gamma. It was a single garbled transmission received 2 hours before the check-in calls went unanswered. The transcript read, Cassian reports compromise. Sitter is, they are not who we think. Requesting immediate protocol is void. I repeat, is here. The blanks were maddening. Who was the sitter, the agent assigned to guard him? Who was here? Reading between the lines of black ink, Reed could piece together a terrifying narrative. Cassian hadn't fled. He had realized his protectors were his captors. The agency hadn't lost him. A faction within the agency had taken him. He wasn't a dead-end witness because he disappeared. He was a dead-end witness because he had been successfully silenced by the very people he was trying to expose. The redacted pages were not just missing information. They were a tombstone. They were proof that the official story was a lie and that the truth was deemed so dangerous it had to be chemically and digitally obliterated from the record. The file ended with a single, unredacted sentence, a closing remark from the director at the time. The integrity of the agency is paramount. No further action is to be taken. And with that, the trail went cold, forever. Evelyn Reed closed the file, the truth she sought both in her hands and a million miles away, hidden behind bars of ink. The investigation was over. The dead end was final. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can only lead to an empty room. Narrator. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery, the scene at the Riverbend Motel was not one of methodical investigation, but of controlled chaos. The body of our key witness, Elias Vance, the man who held the thread that could unravel everything, hadn't even grown cold before the jurisdictional war began. Local police were first on the scene. Their tape, a flimsy yellow barrier against the encroaching darkness, was quickly superseded by the authority of state detectives. But they were just the opening act. Within the hour, 2 black sedans, devoid of any official markings, rolled into the parking lot. Out stepped men in crisp, dark suits who identified themselves only as federal agents. They carried no badges that anyone recognized, only an aura of indisputable authority. This was the first and most critical tear in the fabric of the investigation. Detective Miller, a 20-year veteran of the local force, described the encounter in a later, suppressed deposition. They walked in like they owned the place. They didn't ask, they told. Our crime scene logs, our preliminary photos, our witness statements. They requisitioned everything. When my captain objected, one of them made a quiet phone call. 5 minutes later, the mayor himself is on the line, telling my captain to stand down and offer full cooperation. Cooperation meant getting out of their way. This wasn't a joint task force. It was a hostile takeover. Evidence that should have been bagged, tagged, and sent to the local crime lab was instead placed into sealed metal briefcases and loaded into the unmarked sedans. The chain of custody, a sacred principle in any legitimate investigation, was shattered before it was even established. The local coroner was prevented from moving the body for 3 hours, forced to wait for a specialized federal team to conduct their own primary examination on site, a highly irregular procedure. This conflict created a black hole at the very center of the case. Who was in charge? The local police department filed a report, the State Bureau filed another, and the federal presence filed nothing at all, at least not in any public record. Key details differed wildly between the reports that did exist. The time of death, the position of the body, the items found on the bedside table, all were subject to conflicting accounts. It was a perfect storm of bureaucratic confusion, a fog of war that descended upon a single motel room. Was this a genuine clash of egos and protocols between agencies, a catastrophic failure of interdepartmental communication? Or was it something far more deliberate? A strategy designed to contaminate the investigation from its inception, ensuring that any evidence collected would be rendered inadmissible, any conclusion drawn questionable. The result was the same, regardless of intent. The investigation into the man who knew too much was dead on arrival, strangled by the very institutions meant to seek justice. The trail didn't go cold. It was flash-frozen, buried under the weight of conflicting authority, and sealed away in classified files. Narrator. Amid the jurisdictional chaos and the systematic removal of evidence, one item was overlooked in the initial sweep, only to be discovered by the local coroner's assistant. Tucked deep inside Elias Vance's left shoe, folded into a tiny, dense square, was a small piece of paper. It was not a suicide note. It was not a confession. It was an enigma. The note, now designated Exhibit 3B in a case file that would never see a courtroom, contained just 3 lines of text, written in a shaky but deliberate hand. The first line was a sequence of numbers, 74.1125.22472. The second, a single, cryptic phrase, "The silent canary sings at dusk." The third line was not a word, but a crudely drawn symbol, a circle with a vertical line passing through its center, intersected by a single horizontal line just above the midpoint. It resembled an ancient alchemical symbol or a forgotten astronomical sign, but it matched nothing in any standard database. This small, unassuming piece of paper became the new focal point for the few investigators who still believed there was a truth to be found. But it was a lock with no key. The number sequence was the first to be cracked, at least partially. It was an IP address, a location on the internet. But when technicians traced it, they hit another dead end. The address resolved to a defunct server, wiped clean and decommissioned years prior. It was a digital ghost town. Was this the location of a data drop Vance had prepared? Or was it a trap, a digital breadcrumb left to send investigators on a wild goose chase? The phrase, "the silent canary sings at dusk," was even more baffling. It was poetic, almost literary. Codebreakers from Quantico worked on it for weeks. They explored every possibility. Was canary a reference to a canary trap, a method used to detect leaks by giving different versions of a sensitive document to different suspects? Did dusk refer to a specific time, an impending event, or the end of something? Perhaps Vance's own life. Every theory was plausible, but none were provable. It was a maddening piece of psychological warfare against anyone who might try to follow his trail. Finally, there was the symbol. Experts in semiotics, history, and even occultism were consulted. It bore a resemblance to the symbol for antimony, an element associated with purification, but also with the planet Earth in some esoteric traditions. It also looked like a modified version of the phi symbol. Each interpretation opened a new door, but every door led to another hallway of speculation. The note was Vance's last testament, his final attempt to pass on what he knew. But he had encrypted it, not with a cipher, but with ambiguity. He provided just enough information to prove that he knew something vital, but not enough for anyone to understand what it was. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into an ocean of secrecy, its meaning likely dying with the only man who understood it. Narrator: if Elias Vance's physical life was erased in a motel room, his digital life was systematically annihilated by an unseen, ruthlessly efficient force. In the 21st century, a person's true secrets are rarely kept in a locked drawer. They reside on hard drives, in the cloud, on servers scattered across the globe. Vance, a former systems analyst for a major defense contractor, would have known this better than anyone. The investigators who were sidelined from the physical crime scene turned their attention to his digital footprint, hoping to find the Rosetta Stone that would unlock the cryptic note and the secrets he died to protect. They were met with a digital void. Vance's laptop, recovered from his apartment, was a useless brick. The hard drive hadn't just been wiped, it had been subjected to a military-grade degaussing process, completely randomizing the magnetic domains and rendering any data recovery impossible. This wasn't the work of a panicked man trying to cover his tracks. It was the work of a professional, an expert in counterforensics. His cloud accounts were similarly barren. Records obtained from the service providers showed login activity from an untraceable IP address routed through multiple international proxies just hours before his body was discovered. Every file was deleted, and then the account itself was permanently purged. Even the provider's own backups were mysteriously corrupted for the specific time frame in question. It was a digital assassination. But the assassins, for all their precision, made one small error. They missed a single obscure device. An old, forgotten e-reader Vance kept in his desk drawer at a previous job, a job he'd left 2 years prior. A junior analyst, chasing a hunch, managed to secure the device before it could be lost in an evidence locker. For weeks, a small, clandestine team worked on it. Most of the memory was filled with novels, but deep in the partitioned, unused sectors of the device's flash memory, they found fragments. Not whole files, but ghostly echoes of data. Deleted, overwritten, but not entirely gone. They found remnants of encrypted email headers, addressed to an investigative journalist who had vanished 6 months earlier. They found partial schematics for a technology that didn't officially exist. They found a single, uncorrupted sentence in a deleted text file that read, "Project Nightingale is not about surveillance, it's about control. The target is the infrastructure." It was nothing and everything. These fragments were tantalizing hints of a massive conspiracy, but they were inadmissible as evidence, too broken and decontextualized to form a coherent narrative. The ghost in the machine had whispered, but its words were scattered to the wind. The unseen hand that had silenced Vance had almost succeeded in silencing his digital echo as well, leaving investigators with yet another dead end. This one paved with corrupted data and the chilling realization of their opponent's technological superiority. Narrator. Every cover-up requires a story, a simple, plausible narrative to satisfy the public, to close the file, to make the uncomfortable questions go away. And so, 6 weeks after Elias Vance was found dead, the official story was released. Vance, a man with a history of work-related stress and personal instability, had tragically taken his own life. He was a paranoid whistleblower, they claimed, who had become consumed by delusions of conspiracy. The cryptic note was dismissed as the nonsensical ramblings of a troubled mind. The jurisdictional conflict at the crime scene was chalked up to procedural misunderstandings in a high-pressure situation. The wiped electronics were explained away as Vance's own paranoid attempts to hide his communications before his final act. The case was closed. It was a neat, tidy package, wrapped in the authority of a multi-agency press release. But it was a lie. For those who had been on the inside, even briefly, the official narrative was not just false, it was an insult to the very idea of truth. Let us dismantle it, piece by piece. A man with personal instability does not use military-grade data destruction techniques on his own devices. A man consumed by delusions does not create a multi-layered enigma like the note, with a verifiable IP address and complex symbolic language. And procedural misunderstandings do not involve federal agents with no identifiable agency seizing all evidence and silencing a mayor with a single phone call. The official story crumbled under the slightest scrutiny. It accounted for none of the anomalies. It ignored the ghost data found on the e-reader mentioning Project Nightingale. It ignored the connection to a missing journalist. It ignored the professional, almost surgical precision of the entire event. The narrative wasn't designed to be believed by those who knew the facts. It was designed to be accepted by a public that didn't. The goal was not to solve the death of Elias Vance, but to bury him and his secrets a second time. The investigation wasn't a failure. It was a resounding success for those who wanted the truth to remain hidden. The dead end wasn't a point of failure for investigators. It was the intended destination from the very beginning. The final report, stamped "Closed, Suicide," is the true crime. It is the final piece of misdirection. The case of Elias Vance teaches us a chilling lesson: that sometimes the most powerful forces in the world don't need to find a killer, because they are the ones who orchestrate the disappearance of the crime itself, leaving nothing but a file, a fabricated story, and a permanent, echoing silence. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once closed, were never meant to be opened again. Time is the ultimate solvent. It dissolves memories, rusts evidence, and buries secrets under layers of indifference. For the case of the vanished financier, Arthur Vance, time had been particularly cruel. The investigation didn't just go cold. It was flash-frozen in the winter of 1978, sealed by the testimony and subsequent disappearance of a single, enigmatic figure. They called him the dead-end witness. He was the last person known to have seen Vance alive, a dock worker named Elias Thorne, who provided a statement so convoluted, so full of contradictions, that it sent the investigation spiraling into a labyrinth of false leads. Thorne claimed Vance was meeting with men in foreign military attire. Then he claimed Vance boarded a cargo ship bound for Panama. Then, under further questioning, he recanted everything, claiming he'd seen nothing at all. A week later, Elias Thorne himself vanished, leaving behind an empty apartment and a case file that now had a gaping hole at its center. Was he a liar? A co-conspirator? Or a man terrified into silence? Without him, every path led to a brick wall. The decades that followed were a testament to this paralysis. The original detectives, men who had staked their reputations on solving the Vance case, grew old. Their confident strides turned to weary shuffles as they packed up their desks, leaving behind cabinets filled with ghosts. The Vance file, once thick with daily reports and urgent telexes, was relegated to a cardboard box, its label yellowing under the dim fluorescent lights of the county archives. It became a piece of departmental lore, a cautionary tale for rookie detectives about how a single, unreliable source could poison an entire investigation. The dead-end witness became a phantom, a name whispered with a mix of frustration and intrigue. The physical evidence, a single muddy boot print, a half-smoked cigarette found near Vance's abandoned car, a cryptic note with a sequence of numbers, was cataloged and stored, its potential significance eroding with each passing year. The world moved on. New crimes demanded attention, new mysteries captured the public's imagination. The disappearance of Arthur Vance and the man who held the key became just another line item in a ledger of unsolved cases, a permanent monument to a perfect dead end. Hope, like a subterranean river, can flow unseen for decades before finding a crack in the surface. For the Arthur Vance case, that crack appeared in the sterile, quiet room of a hospice care facility. Detective Frank Miller, one of the original lead investigators, was losing his battle with cancer. He was a man haunted by his failures, and no failure was greater than the case derailed by the dead-end witness, Elias Thorne. In his final days, lucid moments were rare, but in one of them, he summoned his daughter, a lawyer, and with a trembling hand, pushed a sealed envelope across the bedside table. He called it his final report. It wasn't an official document, but a personal memorandum, a confession of investigative regret written on thin, almost translucent paper. The text was a chaotic mix of memory and speculation. Miller wrote that he never believed Thorne was a liar. He believed he was a terrified man, a pawn in a game far bigger than a simple disappearance. They made him the jester, Miller wrote, so no one would look at the king. The memorandum contained fragments that made no sense on their own. The almanac is the key. Don't trust the manifest. And most chillingly, a single underlined name. Silas. Not Elias. Silas. Was it a typo from a dying man, or a clue that had been overlooked for 40 years? Miller believed the entire investigation had been misdirected by a deliberate campaign of disinformation, with Thorne as its unwilling centerpiece. He theorized that Thorne's conflicting stories weren't a sign of unreliability, but a coded message he was forced to deliver. The memorandum posited that the numbers in Vance's note weren't a code, but a page number and a word count, pointing to a specific phrase in a specific edition of a farmer's almanac. It was a desperate, dying man's attempt to correct a 40-year-old mistake to point future investigators back to the beginning. But with a new lens, he was asserting that the dead-end witness wasn't a dead end at all. He was a signpost, deliberately pointed in the wrong direction. The memorandum ended with a final, chilling instruction. Look where the water meets the stone. He never left the quarry. Frank Miller died 2 days later, leaving behind a cryptic puzzle that blew the dust off a frozen case and gave a ghost a new name. Miller's memorandum was a spark in a dark room. It didn't solve the case, but it illuminated a new path. The cold case unit, armed with this posthumous guidance, petitioned to have the original evidence unsealed. What followed was a collision of two worlds, the analog past and the digital present. The evidence boxes, untouched for decades, were opened in the sterile, pressurized environment of a modern forensic lab. The smell of aging paper and decaying cardboard filled the air. The first item under the microscope was the half-smoked cigarette found near Vance's car. In 1978, it was tested for blood type, a primitive technique that yielded nothing of value. Now, technicians carefully swabbed the filter for DNA. The lab was a hive of quiet, intense activity. While one team worked on the cigarette, another focused on the cryptic note. Following Miller's theory, they procured a 1977 edition of the Old Farmer's Almanac. The numbers on the note were 112 to 418. Page 112, paragraph 4, word 18. The word was below. It was a single word, yet it was more than they'd had in 40 years. The most significant breakthrough, however, came from an item that was barely considered evidence at the time. A small, tattered piece of burlap snagged on the fence near where Vance's car was found. It was logged and forgotten. Under a high-powered electron microscope, analysts found something incredible. Embedded deep within the fibers were microscopic traces of granite dust and, shockingly, a single strand of hair. The DNA from the hair was degraded, but it wasn't a match for Arthur Vance. The lab ran the partial profile from the cigarette against the profile from the hair. They matched. It was a profile belonging to an unknown male. But who? The name from Miller's memorandum, Silas, was now the guiding star. They ran the name through old criminal databases, looking for associates of Vance or Thorne. They found him, Silas Croft, a former explosives expert who worked at the old North Ridge Quarry, a man with a violent record who had disappeared from public records in early 1979, just months after Vance and Thorne. The physical evidence, once a collection of meaningless objects, was now telling a story. The burlap, the granite dust, the cigarette, the almanac. They were all pointing to the same place Miller's dying mind had: the quarry. The dead-end witness was no longer the central mystery. He was the first victim in a chain of events that ended at that quarry. The pieces were finally falling into place, forming a picture far darker than anyone had imagined. The new evidence didn't just reopen the case, it completely rewrote its narrative. The prevailing theory for 40 years was that Elias Thorne, the dead-end witness, had either been paid to disappear or had fled, fearing for his life after providing a confusing statement. Miller's memorandum and the new forensics suggested a more brutal and permanent silencing. The emerging theory was this: Arthur Vance, a financier secretly involved in illicit arms deals, was scheduled to meet his partners at the secluded North Ridge Quarry. The deal went bad. Silas Croft, the muscle, was there to ensure there were no loose ends. Elias Thorne, a simple dock worker who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, saw something he shouldn't have. He wasn't a co-conspirator. He was an accidental witness. The perpetrators, likely Croft and his associates, couldn't risk killing him outright, not immediately. Instead, they coerced him. They forced him to become the dead-end witness, feeding the police a series of contradictory, nonsensical stories designed to create chaos and confusion, to send the investigation down rabbit holes while they covered their tracks. His performance was meant to discredit himself and the entire case. Once he had served his purpose, once the police were thoroughly lost in the weeds of his fabricated testimony, he was no longer useful. He was a liability. The granite dust on the burlap, Croft's connection to the quarry, and Miller's final, desperate message, "Look where the water meets the stone. He never left the quarry," all converged on one horrifying conclusion. Elias Thorne's disappearance wasn't an escape. It was a disposal. The investigators now believe that after derailing the investigation, Thorne was taken back to the quarry and murdered. His body was hidden where no one would ever think to look, in the vast, abandoned expanse of rock and water. The dead-end witness was a dead end because he was, in fact, dead. The investigation had come full circle, back to the beginning, but with a new, grim purpose. It was no longer about finding a missing witness, it was about recovering a murder victim. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the scarred landscape, a convoy of official vehicles made its way down the overgrown path to the North Ridge Quarry. The team wasn't just armed with shovels and ground-penetrating radar. They carried the weight of a 40-year-old secret, hoping to finally give a name to a ghost and justice to the man who was forced to become a dead end.